You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome back to another episode of Breaking BizDev, where Mark and I like to break down, beat up, and redefine business development topics for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Mark, I am excited for our conversation today because we're going to talk about strategic partnerships.
Right. We've got an added voice into the mix today. We've had some episodes in the past, and we will have some episodes in the future where we like to bring others into our podcast and kind of add their perspective. So we've got that in store today. And I think that partnerships are a huge opportunity for so many professional services firms because it gives you the opportunity to kind of link arms with other firms and understand how you can, do that 1 + 1 is 3 kind of a thing with your clients, right? And I think we all really just focus on, as consultants, a lot of times we get really sort of, narrowly focused on just our clients when there's a huge opportunity for us to serve them better with other partners. So this will be a good conversation.
In today's episode, we're going to break down what strategic partnerships are, why they're so valuable, who you should target. And then, Mark, you mentioned earlier, we've got a guest clip that we're going to bring in at the back end of the episode. And that'll be interesting perspective on how software companies evaluate potential consultants as partnerships. So I thought that was a valuable perspective because it kind of turns the tables a little bit and it helps us see things from another point of view.
The evaluation, the vetting, the assessment of other partners, who is the best fit, who will help you serve your clients the best. That's a good perspective. I am very familiar with some specific types of professional services firms, less so with when it comes to sort of software and technology consultants. But any consultant organization out there, any professional services firm definitely needs to take advantage of great partnerships. Very rarely can you serve a client all by yourself. So it's worth a conversation today that we can kind of poke and prod around it, and it's worth firms out there to kind of consider, who the best partners are out there and bring a little bit more sort of rigor and energy to vetting, selecting, prioritizing, etc.
Before we dig into that conversation, I just want to remind folks, don't forget to leave the show a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Leave a review and we'll give you a shout out on the show. Mark, let's define what we mean by strategic partnerships. So how would you define a strategic partnership?
Well, there's two words there. There's that tricky strategy word, but
that's right.
A true partnership is a mutually beneficial relationship between two, firms that generally don't compete against, each other in the marketplace and who are serving kind of a similar market or a, similar client, right? So, and there's a ton of industries out there where this happens all the time, maybe some a little bit less so, but yeah, that's the definition. We'll talk about the strategy part in a second, but one of the analogies I've often used when we talk about these sort of strategic partnerships or partnerships in general is that there are these celestial bodies, moons, satellites, planets that are kind of in orbit around your client organization. And there can be just a few and there can be many. And it benefits all of the consultants, all the professional services firms to understand that they are in orbit around their clients, that they all occupy a particular, space, that their clients turn to them, each independently for specific needs, and that there's an opportunity for all those sort of celestial bodies to kind of work in concert to serve the client.
I love this analogy for a few different reasons. Number one, I think it's a great visual for folks to kind of to see in their heads as they're listening to this. The other reason why I like that analogy is because, it can be very orchestrated It can be very choreographed with all of those different pieces orbiting around the client. But, on the flip side of that, it can also be kind of chaotic and violent at times. If some of those things, those bodies that are in orbit around your client, if they crash into each other, or if there's some conflict between two different partners serving the client. So I can see how, you want to avoid that. You don't want it to be chaotic. You don't want it to be violent. You want it to be orchestrated. And that helps kind of the whole ecosystem all at once.
Now, that other word that we mentioned, that whole strategy word, we've talked
Strategy.
about this in the past, right? So there's some really good thinkers out there about strategy and that concept. I think it's overused and sort of kind of understood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this sense, I really feel like strategic partnerships are relationships that you can form with these kind of partner firms who you are in orbit with around your clients. The true strategy in this whole thing is that you are obsessively focused on your client and your clients' clients, right? Their customers, regardless of who they are. Strategy for me is that ability to see through your client organization and serve them in a way that benefits their customers. So that's true strategy for me, is that it's outward thinking, it's outward looking, and it's that ability to bring that vision and perspective to the clients you serve and help them serve others better, right? So that's my kind of spin on strategy. The contrast of that is that a lot of organizations thinks, kind of just coming up with a plan is strategic, even if it's sort of focused internally. It's like, here's our plan, here's our 10 pages of what our firm strategy is, and most of it's related to what we're going to do internally and how we're going to operate as an organization. I don't think that's strategic. I think strategy is constantly and obsessively outwardly focused and looking outward and looking forward as much as possible. So I don't know. That's my spin on strategy, John.
Well, I want to unpack that a little bit. So seeing through your client organization to their customers, there's a lot of empathy that needs to happen in that case, right? Putting yourself into not just the shoes of your client, but into the shoes of the customers of your client, and really taking a minute to walk a mile in their shoes and understand their point of view so that you can act as an agent for your client. I really like that. I think that that's a great way to think about it. And it seems like you'd need to, I guess, Mark, how would you get to that understanding, right? What are some of the steps to get there?
If you are a consultant serving an organization, it is taking a posture of curiosity and inquiry with your immediate clients to kind of understand their world, understand what they're trying to achieve, understand the organizations that they in turn are serving, et cetera. So it's you develop that empathy through a really deep sense of curiosity and inquiry. And I mean, that's why strategy is difficult. I think people think strategy is hard because it's just a lot of work, and there's outlines, and there's the plan and all that stuff, and just assembling that whole thing and getting individuals aligned around it can be challenging. But I think strategy is hard because it's looking at things from someone else's perspective. And that's hard, right? It's just we're not naturally sort of built that way, that we're constantly looking at things from other perspectives.
Yeah, gain that added perspective, ask the right questions,
right?
Seek out the relevant information. So, okay, that's really good. So let's give our listeners some examples of, what's the range of strategic partnerships? What does a strategic partnership look like, right? So I think that there's it could span the whole marketing and sales continuum, and we've got a few examples there. Why don't we do this? Let's kind of ping pong back and forth, Mark. Let's start on the sales end, those fives on our sales and marketing continuum, and then we can meet in the middle. Does that sound good?
Good. Yeah, the five that comes to mind for me are shared pursuits, collaboration between either sort of lead consultant organizations and all their sub-consultants, or sort of like true mutual collaborations or partnerships. When the new business opportunity is staring you in the face, there's an active buyer involved, and you are pursuing that together. That is absolutely a sales driven sort of example of partnerships. And that one's pretty easy, I think, for a lot of organizations to understand. So on the flip side, John, way back over at the marketing end of the continuum, the ones, what do we got there?
All right, so this is let's contrast that shared pursuit example. I think that's a really great example of two organizations selling on the other end of the spectrum. This would be a one. So this would be very, very marketing focused in social media engagement groups, or if you find a partner that, said is kind of like a quid pro quo, like, hey, let's help each other out on social media. When I post something, you like my stuff, I'll like your stuff. Let's swap comments and things like that. That can be a way to just periodically over time, access the relationships, the networks of your partners and get in front of them and start to build awareness.
I love that. It's leveraging each other's networks from a marketing perspective, gaining additional insights and perspective from your partner organizations from marketing, and also, if your client or prospective client organizations come across that content and they see that you are truly you're truly collaborators, right? That you not only do you deliver work together, but you're also sort of, co-marketing and that shows that your organizations are sort of aligned in the way that you see the world, in
Right.
your perspective. So I think it's fantastic.
Let's go back to the other end of the spectrum and not quite all the way on the end of the sales things, but what would be an example of a strategic partnership that kind of falls in that 4 range on our spectrum?
Yeah, the 4s are one example of them. I think are referrals, because it moves towards we don't have the opportunity identified, so we're not in that selling motion, but both organizations have their sort of sales teams or their doer sellers or whoever, you have there sharing professional connections in a referral capacity. There's some industries that referrals are their oxygen. I know that accounting firms, legal firms, sometimes real estate brokerages, financial advisors, those types of professional services firms, that is their lifeblood. They share those things regularly. So they are constantly trading kind of referrals to develop new business and find new clients. So I think that's a 4. I think that fits well with
Totally.
the 4s. Sure.
Yeah. And if we go back to the other end of the spectrum, we're kind of creeping towards that middle here. I would say an example of a 2 on our marketing and sales continuum would be co-marketing on webinars or events or podcasts. You could think of sponsorships would be an example of like a co-marketing arrangement where, it's more of a brand visibility play, but it's more formalized, I guess, maybe the word I'm searching for, over, just reciprocity on social media. So yeah, I've done a few of these in the past where I've even co-branded a research report. And so developed a research report, and then there were some organizations who wanted to put their brand on the report. So those are a couple of examples on the 2s.
Yeah, that works. And in the middle there's a whole bunch of stuff we can kind of,
Sure,
for better or for worse, kind of lump in the middle. I think a really basic one is very akin to referrals, and I think it's lead sharing. It's organizations finding really great clients for each other and operating kind of in that mode. Like I said, there's a handful of professional services firms that I know of that's everything they do. Others less so, but that's, sharing leads definitely falls in that category.
Yeah, totally. And that could be kind of like it could stem from some of those co-branded webinars, for example, where, you do a webinar and you share the list of registrants between the 2 parties that are doing the webinar.
Yeah, fair enough.
So those are common examples in the marketplace.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those are some examples of different kinds of strategic partnerships. I think, we talked about the importance of strategy and alignment with the client that you are in orbit around. And I think that these partnerships, they can be very, very formal. They can be very, very informal. Formality becomes more important with those larger organizations if you're partnering with those larger organizations, but it's really kind of an extension of the culture of your own organization, how formal those partnerships are. So, Mark, why are strategic partnerships valuable? Why is this something that our listeners should consider as part of their business development strategy?
the thing we mentioned before, that 1+1 is 3, the ability to serve the client better by collaborating or bringing in, the best partners is obvious. In some of the things that we've talked about in the past, maybe it's we might have a future episode, I think, John, kind of on this, or a previous episode. I can't remember where we are in our sequence of things, but we talk a little bit about developing plans around important client accounts. I call those account development plans. And segment development plans are plans that consulting firms develop around kind of markets and industries and whatever particular segment they are interested in growing and pursuing. So those two types of plans really leverage these relationships, and they underscore and highlight the importance of really recognizing who your important partners are and getting to know them more deeply. Really questioning and coming at those partners with a good, really healthy sense of inquiry and curiosity, just like you would prospective clients and current client organizations, right? So both of these sort of sales planning types, account development plans and segment development plans, leverage your partners, and they really need you to define who your partners are, go talk to them, understand everything you can about them, understand their perspective on maybe a client or an industry that you are serving together, because different organizations, even different people, have different perspectives on clients that you're serving together. So those types of plans kind of naturally integrate this whole concept of partnerships.
I've got two big takeaways from what you just said, Mark. Number one, first of all, I love this lens from which we're looking at partnerships. It's not how can the partner add value to my organization, it's how can these partners add value to my client's organization, right, or the kinds of clients that I serve. So I think that's just one big takeaway that I have from just kind of this thread of this conversation we're having. The other one is these partnerships are really kind of like sales opportunities a little bit. And there's a lot of similarities. And it would behoove your organization to manage that process and to have that become kind of like I don't want to say a formalized process, but there needs to be at least some sort of a structure to developing and nurturing these strategic partnership opportunities.
What I see again and again is a lot of consultant organizations don't spend enough time, or don't recognize the importance of spending more time vetting, understanding, getting to know the future plans, goals, hopes, and dreams of their partners as much as they would their clients and prospective clients.
Right.
That is important. And I think that, like I said, I think it's a huge opportunity. If your professional services firm wants to go looking for new opportunities, turn to your longtime partners and get to know them better. I am confident that there's, a wealth of opportunity just getting to know your partners better.
Couldn't agree more.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyerman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
All right, so who should you target as potential partners? So like we talked about who is in orbit around the client. We talked about examples of the different kinds of partnership structures and partnership arrangements, but what are some examples of the different kinds of players in orbit around your client that could be potential strategic partnership opportunities?
This gets really industry specific. They're in the tech world, they are complementary service providers. In a lot of the firms that I work with, John, are in the sort of architecture, engineering world. These are firms that have areas of expertise that your firm does not. I mean, there's a lot of times significant projects, of any type are led by a single firm. Oftentimes that might be an architectural firm, and then they are supported by a host of sub consultant firms, civil engineering firms, structural engineering firms, et cetera. So having a good understanding of that's really important. I don't come across a ton of situations where we have kind of two equal consulting partners coming in. You may come across that in what you do. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I get hit up all the time from agencies or from solo consultants who, they wanted to develop a referral program
Oh,
with
yeah.
me where, I send them business or they send me business and I send them a kickback of 10, 15%. I don't like doing that. I
Mhm.
not, especially not right out of the gate. Right. And I think one of the things we're talking about today is, does being selective with the partners that you take on, right?
Sure.
And there needs to be an element of trust and there needs to be a relationship there for that to make sense. And, just looking at it purely as a revenue opportunity kind of takes the client out of the picture, to like my earlier point about how this needs to be client centric. So,
Yeah.
I've run into that a number of times. There are, technology platforms that I think make sense. And in my line of work, and I think in a lot of consultants' lines of work, there's CRMs that are very industry focused. That's just one example that comes to mind immediately for some like different kinds of strategic partners. So
Right.
like in that vein, I think the SaaS world is completely different than the professional services world.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different, jargon. There's a lot of different ways that those companies approach partnerships. And so we have a guest clip from Julie Geller, who is the principal research director at Infotech Research Group. And her focus is on sales effectiveness, disruptive go-to market strategies, and using generative AI for the client experience. She works mostly with B2B tech companies. And I caught up with her and we talked about her perspective on what those kinds of software platforms look for in a consultant as a partner. And I thought that this would be interesting perspective for our listeners who might want to, step into the shoes of potential partners, strategic partnership opportunities, and how they evaluate consultants.
Great. Let's take a listen.
All right, here comes Julie.
I think that one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is that that clients are thinking to themselves, how am I going to expand my partnership network? What am I going to do to formalize it? I need to create more relationships. They might even see certain opportunities and think to themselves, I'm not really sure exactly how to take this off. And what I've been noticing is that there is this sort of movement toward more of a near-bound mindset. And that near-bound mindset is to collaborate with partners that are sort of adjacent to your ecosystem. So something that you can pull on to say, hey, it does make sense that we're partnering together. You might have been at even a trade show or, had a different kind of dealing with them where they might have been in the same environment as you. And that's something to look out for, as well as, if you guys can dovetail in the services together and then leverage each other's networks. That's a great way to do it, just on that one aspect.
Okay. And I like the term near bound. In my mind, I'm seeing, other individuals, organizations in the marketplace that serve the same or similar target audience to you, but maybe they serve
Mhm.
them in a different way. And are those the kinds of partners that we're looking at?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think that you want to be kind of understanding exactly how close is it to what it is that you're selling or what you're trying to accomplish, because those are the individuals that will be the best, I think, ambassadors as well for your product, because you have to
Mhm.
consider that these people have to, get onboarded. They have to thoroughly understand what it is, that the capabilities, the features, whatever it is, and then be able to speak to that in a competent way. And those people are often not the resources that really understand how to sell. So I've seen this quite a bit where, there's situations of, we created this partnership, but actually we don't know how to further it, or we don't know how to
Mhm.
onboard them. So they often try to do things like, the first thing is that they're not creating and defining those clear objectives and those KPIs. So what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the business goals on both sides? How do we make this scalable together? I think first and foremost, in terms of when you are creating that partnership. What do you want to do? And then creating the structured framework around it. Is it like more of a, what are the do's and the don'ts? What do we want to get into here? What are we trying to kick off the relationship with? And that dovetails more into onboarding, which I don't know about you, John, but I've seen a lot of really bad onboarding plans that are just really static.
Yep. Yeah, I've experienced some of that myself.
Yeah, right. I mean, where they're like, watch this 6 video series of how to sell our XYZ. And you're like, I have other things I want to do.
With those referral programs, I would imagine that they look much different if you're installing a referral program for a smaller business versus a larger business. So maybe just like thinking of those two extremes, can you help me kind of contrast what that looks like maybe on a small scale, and then what might it look like on an enterprise scale?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because I do think that there is a difference between the way that you want to engage like more boutique style firms, versus those that are kind of more on the enterprise scale. So of course the formality is going to be a lot different. But I do think that you can use very similar strategies, I think, to engage both. I think where it might differ is understanding what the culture is for both, which I think will be quite different. So is it more of a let's call it fast type culture where they have a lot of responsibilities on their plate? Maybe watching like I was saying before, a video series is not going to be conducive. Potentially, maybe you're better off creating something like a partner community where they can chime in, where they can have a chance to shine. Maybe there's, functional and personal goals that are associated with their roles that you want to concern yourself with, and say, okay, how do I make, how do I kind of create goals that are connected to those two things, because they're heading toward them anyway, especially in something like an enterprise partnership. But more on like the boutique level, perhaps they need more of a touch, right? A touch point. So you need to be reaching out to them. It could be a smaller, more insular group of individuals selling the platform or engaging with the platform. What are their struggles? Because they're all, I think, servicing different kinds of clients as well. So the struggle on the enterprise side is certainly not likely to be similar to what the goals are of the more boutique side. You're going to have to customize those conversations and the materials to, I think, feel like it's native to them.
Okay, Mark, there are a couple of takeaways from what Julie had to say that I thought were interesting. And I've heard this term come about and bubble up on LinkedIn, this whole nearbound mindset. It's not inbound, it's not outbound, it's nearbound. Have you heard this?
I haven't. That was the first time I had heard that. It's a word that is connected with a concept that I'm very familiar with. But yeah, that was a new term to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting way to think about it. And so, yeah, I think it's very similar to what we were just talking about in terms of like being in orbit around the client. So that's how I kind of like connected those dots in my mind. I thought it was interesting how Julie talked about the challenge of training and onboarding consultants and how to sell the technology. But in my mind, I kind of am taking a little bit of a different approach to this. I feel like this is more of an opportunity for consultants to position themselves as augmenting their expertise with technology, as opposed to thinking about selling the technology and gaining a commission. It's how can I, again, add value to my client?
Yeah, the higher level takeaway for me on that is the intention that some industries bring to that sort of partnering, onboarding, mutual education, mutual understanding of each other. That when she spoke to that, I was actively translating for a lot of professional services firms out there who don't deal in the technology and software world, and I'm thinking, so how can professional services firms who don't sort of, elevate their sort of partner awareness, partner education, partner understanding to that level? How can they do that? What advantages are there? And I think the advantages are huge. You probably don't want to spread yourself too thin with an exercise like this, but absolutely, when you have found those great fit partners, I think bringing this level of rigor and energy and focus to those relationships where you are onboarding each other, educating each other, gaining a deep understanding is critical. I think there's a lot to be learned.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just what the features and benefits of technology are, it's what are the outcomes that you can help deliver for your client, and how does the technology help you with that?
Yeah,
So I thought that was an interesting perspective, and maybe one that can be a little thought provoking for our listeners.
I agree. I agree. This is why we bring in these other voices. I am not a SaaS professional. I do not work with those types of firms. I'm sure you've kind of bumped into those firms historically.
From time to time.
The technology industry has some different ways of doing things, and I think that there's a lot of professional services firms who could benefit from looking at things a little bit differently.
Well, Mark, I think we've sufficiently broken down and beat up this topic a little bit. So until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.